Those days on the railway were physically hard, and as you've moved from cleaner to footplate, you had one more obstacle to deal with: the engine driver.
Some were good drivers, some were bad drivers. You needed to go with a good driver to find out what a bad driver was. The drivers have been known not to take past cleaners, not taking him. They would go and see the running shed foreman, who was responsible for crewing locos, and they would say, I'm not taking him. Because if you took a past cleaner and say you had a bad experience, the next time you got him, I'm not taking him. It was very cruel, really, on the past cleaners.
I was on 6 o'clock in the morning. I was supposed to be on what they call berthing the engines from the wet pit to the shed like, you know. He said, oh, go to engine such a number. There's a driver waiting, his mate's not come, so I got on. And he said, who are you? So I said, I haven't been out before. I said, well, don't worry, I have. You know, very good he was. And then 2 days after that, I got on an engine. He said, who are you? I said, well, I've only been out once. He said, you're not going out twice. He wouldn't take me with him. So I had to stop in shed that night.
And I had one horrendous ride back from Brighouse in Yorkshire. I was sent out as a cleaner, catch such a train from Manchester Victoria, go to Brighouse and ring control. And I had to relieve the firemen on this goods train at Brighouse. I didn't know where Brighouse was. I know it's in Yorkshire, but after that, forget it. Every station I'm hanging out to see whether it's Brighouse. And I'm going all the way through the Calder Valley again, get to Brighouse, ring control at the station. Your train's down in the side, in the eastern end, in the dark, tripping over wires, all that signal wires, one thing or another. Got to the engine, which was in the siding, standing by the water column, relieved the fireman, and it was an Agecroft driver, and we set off. I have never, ever had such an horrendous ride in all your life. The engine wouldn't steam, the injectors would barely work, both of them. We fought our way out of Yorkshire. He was very upset with me, but I couldn't help it because I didn't know any different. If I'd had experience, I might have shaped better. We got back into Lancashire eventually. And again, I had no idea whether I was going uphill or downhill or whichever. And 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And we got back home, and it turned out that the engine had a fault on the valves because it would beat 3 and then limp. You know, out of the 4 beats, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it went 1, 2, 3. The injectors wouldn't work. The exhaust injector wouldn't anyway. The live injector wasn't much better. The engine was faulty. That is one that I remember. Again, inexperience.
Well, they weren't all wonderful drivers. You couldn't pick the mate you were on with. But everyone was someone you'd choose to be with. And that's your driver. There's your 6 months. You're on with him.
He was full of dirty tricks.
You'd be going to crew with the York Mail. When you're running along, you might be leaning out, looking out your side, and you'd come and drop your damper down while you weren't looking. And then when your steam went down because the fire wasn't getting any air, you'd wonder what was happening until you looked at your damper had dropped and all. He was doing it full of stupid things like that, you know.
I had one driver, he used to say to you, Fireboy, call me driver, you see. He used to mark the footplate, sure. That's your side, Fireboy, and this is my side, Fireboy.
One night his mate was filling the tank on a Class 8 at Cheadle Village, and he was always dodging for overtime. And he opened both tender tank feeds, and this lad's getting wet through on the top of the tank, trying to fill the tank, and he's emptying it as fast as he's putting it in. Anyway, the fireman realised, so he threw the bag out, and he said, you make that do to Whaley Bridge. And he did.
Nobody really got on with him. Firemen who went with him after I'd been with him, they were getting some water, and Len had been to brew. He put his brew can on the footplate, and Billy came across and kicked it off. So Len got up and he looked on the warming plate, and there's 2 nice pies that put on there, so he picked them up and threw them in the firebox. That's the sort of thing they got up to, you know.
Now, you see, as you got older, you could do that.
Some blokes took to you quite easily, but I've been with drivers and they've actually said, we're not used to your antics, you know, we were like little live weighers, and they couldn't cope with it. And when we thought about it, they were like old enough to be your granddad.
Some of them were very nice and helpful. Others were just plain horrible, but they were getting old men. And there weren't many of them that hadn't fought in the First World War or the Second, and they'd all had a rough life, and really they'd no time for boys.
There was a percentage of drivers that would never want to make a brew, but he'd drop you off on the edge of the platform to go in the shunter's cabin to make your brew. Then you'd come back out and you'd rejoin him on the engine, and while you were hooking the engine onto the train, he would have a slug out of your tea or coffee, and then he'd fill it up with steaming hot water out of the tender. So there was a driver called Harold Carter, and he had 2 sons, and we made up a plan. So we arranged this night, and I came in, and they had a billy can fixed up with burned oil and sugar, milk and whatever else. And I came out as usual, and I dropped the can on the hot plate, and I went to tie the engine on, and as usual, you know, he kept squeezing up, bouncing off, and that night I was happy to sit down and wait for him eventually to do the job proper. And while I'm sat down, I heard him spit out like, wah! And I got the engine tied on, all the pipes connected up, got back on the engine. He's leaning out on his side, coughing, spluttering, and carrying on. And I picked up the billy can, filled the lid, and pretended to have a sip, and spat it out, and said, Jesus Christ, Tom, you know, what have you been doing with the tea or coffee? I never touched it, he said. I never touched it. So I said, I'll have to go and change it. And I went back in the cabin and got the original one, the real one, and brought it back again. And I never offered him a drink, and it was against my nature not to be nice and share alike. But on that occasion, I never offered him no drink at all.
I've always been a person like this. I accept what comes along. You mightn't like it as much as the one you've just done. I mentioned about having to put up with drivers. I thought some of them were quite nasty, actually. But I had to live with them, and I had to make my life as easy as I could. My philosophy was this, and I was with that man for 6 months. If he was a bowler, I was a bowler. If he was a footballer, I was a footballer. I didn't believe in arguing the toss, because I had to live with that man. And particularly in the double trip links, I lived with that man every other day. And going back to some of the freight links, and naming one area particularly, Carnforth, I've even slept in the same bed as the driver in private lodgings.